Welcome back, everybody, to The Deep Dive. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're talking about something I think we've all got at least a little bit of experience with. Maybe a lot of experience with.
Oh, yeah?
Lies.
Lies.
You know those little white lies? The big whoppers. And of course, everything in between. We're going to try to figure out what's going on in our brains when we decide to fib a little bit.
Right.
And maybe we can even pick up a trick or two about how to spot a lie.
Oh, that'd be good.
So to help us out with all this, we've got an expert on all things brain-related joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you. So we're diving deep today into a really interesting episode of the Spanish language podcast.
Oh, cool.
Called La Ciencia Hoy, which means Today in Science.
I like that.
Yeah.
Catchy.
And the episode's called El Cerebro del Mentiroso, or the liar's brain.
Ooh, sounds juicy.
And I found this stat in there, kind of a crazy stat, that research suggests that people lie, get this, between 10 and 200 times every day.
Wow. That's a lot of lying.
It is a lot of lying.
No.
Makes you wonder, right?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because lying is more than just saying something that's not true. I mean, there's this whole complex cognitive process happening.
Yeah.
And there's emotional stuff going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's going on up there when we're telling a lie?
Well, there's a lot going on. So first, you've got your prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the director of the lie.
Okay.
This is the part of your brain that's doing all the planning.
Oh, so that's where the scheming is happening.
Yeah, is where the scheming is happening.
Yeah.
Making sure the truth stays hidden and coming up with a believable alternative story.
Right.
And actually, this podcast that we're referencing, they talked about a study where people were lying about a card game.
Okay.
And when they were lying, they had increased activity in their prefrontal cortex.
Oh, really?
It actually takes more brain power to lie than to tell the truth.
What? So my brain's working harder when I'm trying to be sneaky.
That's exactly right.
That doesn't seem fair. Why would our brains be like that?
Well, you know, it could be because lying is risky.
Yeah.
You know, we could get caught. We could damage relationships.
Right, of course.
And I think our brains kind of see that.
Uh-huh.
So they're trying to manage that risk.
Okay, so it's like they're wired to be truthful.
Yeah.
And then when we try to lie, they're like, no.
Don't do that.
Let's overthink this and overprocess this to make sure that we're safe.
Yeah. We got to get it right.
Okay.
And then there's the limbic system.
Oh, the limbic system.
Yeah, this is kind of like the emotional center of your brain.
Oh, okay.
It's where all your feelings and emotional reactions are kind of coming from.
Right.
So when you lie, that limbic system, it goes into high gear.
Like it's stressed.
Yeah, like fight or flight. Sending out all those warning signals. Maybe your heart starts racing. Palms get sweaty.
Yep, I know that feeling.
Get that nervous feeling in your stomach. You know those feelings.
Yeah.
I know you know those feelings.
Yeah, I know those feelings very well. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we've got the prefrontal cortex is coming up with the lie, and then we've got the limbic system, which is like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This is bad.
Red alert.
Yeah. There's got to be more to it than that, though, right?
Yeah, so on top of that, your brain has to remember the actual truth.
Right. Because you can't let that go.
No, you can't forget that.
You never know when you're going to need it.
Exactly. So you got to remember the real truth while simultaneously managing the lie, the made-up story. And then on top of that, you have to monitor how the other person is reacting.
Yeah.
To see if they're buying it. And then you got to try to control your emotions.
Oh, so it's like multitasking on a whole new level.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. No wonder I feel so tired after I have to deal with something tricky.
Exactly. And they've actually done studies. I think they used fMRI, which is like a brain scan that lets us peek into brain activity. And the studies have actually shown that lying uses up more energy than truth-telling.
Really?
It's true.
So it's like telling the truth is taking the scenic route, and lying is driving in rush hour traffic.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
It's a lot more effort to get where you're going. But if it's that much effort, why are we doing it so often?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
It is the question.
Why do we lie?
Why do we lie? So that kind of leads me into, well, if all this is going on inside, are there signs, are there things that we can see on the outside that can clue us in to whether or not somebody's lying?
Yeah, like can we actually spot a liar?
Right, just by watching them, listening to them.
It's not quite that simple. It's not as easy as just looking for shifty eyes, which, by the way, that's a myth.
Oh, come on, that's the telltale sign.
I know. But there's some subtle clues that you can look for. They can kind of help you read between the lines.
Okay, so what should I be looking for if not the shifty eyes?
Well, think about it this way. when you lie, it creates stress.
Uh-huh.
And that stress can come out in all sorts of ways.
Okay, let's talk about those ways then. Okay, so we're talking stress, right? Does that mean if I think somebody's lying, I should just look for somebody who's sweating a lot or like biting their fingernails?
Not necessarily.
Well-
I mean, remember we were talking about inconsistencies? It's more about those little things that don't quite line up.
Okay, give me an example. Like what kinds of inconsistencies should I look for?
Okay, well, let's start with body language.
Okay.
Imagine someone telling you that they're totally cool and calm about an upcoming presentation, but their foot is tapping a mile a minute under the table.
Okay, so it's like what they're saying isn't matching up with what their body's doing.
Exactly. Or maybe they say they're really confident about a decision,
Yeah.
but they're like fidgeting with their hands or touching their face a lot.
Right.
You know, these are those little nervous habits that we do
Right.
subconsciously when we're feeling stressed or uncomfortable.
It's like our bodies are trying to tell on us, even when we're trying to keep it cool. Okay. So what about those tiny expressions you mentioned before?
Oh, the microexpression.
Yeah, the micro expressions. Those, like, can we even see those?
You can, but it takes practice.
Okay.
It's super subtle.
Right.
But imagine you're having lunch with a friend
Okay.
and you ask them how they like your new shoes.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, "Oh, they're great."
Yeah.
But for just a split second, you see like this hesitation in their eyes or a little frown before they put on a smile.
I've totally seen that. Like when somebody tries to smile, but you can tell they don't really mean it because their eyes aren't smiling.
That's a great example.
Okay.
And those tiny little expressions, those are micro-expressions.
And they happen that fast.
Super fast.
Wow. Okay, so we got to watch the body language and we got to look for those little micro expressions. What about how somebody talks? Does that tell us anything?
Yeah, for sure. So a liar might be vague in their answers or evasive. Like they'll use lots of generalizations, qualifying statements. They won't give you a lot of detail.
So instead of saying, I went to the grocery store at 3 p.m., they'll say, I think I might have been out running some errands.
That's exactly right. They're leaving themselves an out
right.
in case they need to change their story later.
Oh, that's sneaky. So they're not locking themselves into anything specific.
Exactly. But then you have some liars who go the opposite way.
Oh, really?
They'll give you way too much detail. Way too much. Thinking that if they just throw all this information at you, you'll believe them.
Oh, like they're trying to bury the lie under a bunch of other stuff?
Exactly. But a lot of times it just sounds rehearsed.
Right, like they're trying too hard. Okay, so not enough information or too much information. Both are bad.
Yeah, red flags. Red flags. And listen to the tone of their voice, how quickly they're speaking.
Okay.
When people lie, their voice often gets higher
Oh, yeah.
because of that stress.
Right.
Or they might start talking faster.
Yeah. Like they just want to get it over with.
Exactly. Get that lie out as fast as possible.
Right.
And I know we've been talking about a lot of signs, but we have to be realistic here. Even with all this stuff, it can still be really hard to tell if someone's actually lying. I mean, we're not mind readers.
Right. We're not.
And some people are really good at it.
Oh, yeah.
Skilled liars.
Right.
They can control their behavior.
So you might see some of those signs, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. They could just be nervous about something else.
Exact.
Or maybe they're just shy. Or they're uncomfortable.
It's all about context.
Right.
You gotta look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
You can't just jump to conclusions based on one or two little things.
Okay, good advice. So I know we were talking about how our brains work when we lie, but what about technology? Has science come up with any tools that can help us spot a lie?
Oh, for sure. There's actually some pretty interesting stuff out there.
Okay.
From the classic Polygraph to some cutting edge AI algorithms that can analyze speech patterns.
Okay, hold on. Now we're getting into like spy movie territory. I'm definitely interested to hear more about this.
Oh yeah. Well, let's start with the OG of lie detection,
Okay.
the polygraph, the lie detector test.
The lie detector. Does that actually work? I mean, does it really work?
So basically the polygraph is measuring your body's response to stress.
Okay.
It's looking at things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing, even like how much you're sweating.
Oh.
The idea is that when you lie, you're stressed out, Right.
Right.
So all those changes in your body, they're going to show up on the polygraph.
So it's not really detecting the lie itself,
Right.
but it's detecting the stress that comes with lying.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's one of the big problems with it, because someone could be totally innocent,
Right.
but they could also be really anxious.
Yeah.
So they might look like they're lying.
Right. Just because their heart's beating fast doesn't mean they did it.
Nope. And on the flip side, you got some people, skilled liars, or maybe they've got some sort of condition that affects their emotional responses.
Okay.
They might be able to lie, and the polygraph won't even pick it up.
Oh.
There's this really famous case. I don't know if you've heard of the Green River Killer.
Oh, yeah. Gary Ridgway.
Yes. Gary Ridgway. He actually passed a polygraph test
What?
early in the investigation.
What?
And it actually threw the authorities off for years.
Really?
It was only later they finally caught him with DNA evidence.
Wow, that's scary. Okay, so the polygraph's not the be-all and end-all that we see in the movies.
No, definitely not foolproof.
What about those microexpressions? Can those be used in a more scientific way?
There are people who specialize in microexpression analysis,
Uh-huh.
and they say that they can spot those tiny movements that can reveal someone's true emotions.
Like the TSA agents, right?
Exactly. Like after 9/11, they trained TSA agents to look for suspicious behavior.
They were looking for like signs of fear or anxiety, stuff like that.
And yeah, they were looking for deception too.
Right.
But even though it's a super interesting field, it's also really controversial.
How so?
Well, you need a ton of expertise to be able to read those tiny little expressions accurately.
I bet.
And there's a lot of room for human error and bias.
So it's not perfect either. And to be honest, it's a little creepy to think that somebody's like analyzing my every facial expression.
Right. It raises some questions about privacy.
Yeah, it's a little Big Brother-ish.
For sure. For sure.
Okay, well, what about those AI algorithms?
Oh, yeah. That's a field that's just exploding right now.
Okay.
They're using these algorithms to analyze things like changes in pitch and tone, the speed that you're talking, even the specific words you're using. Just trying to figure out if you're lying. And they're looking at using this for all sorts of stuff. Job interviews, loan applications, even like political speeches and national security investigations.
I can see how that could be helpful, but also a little scary, like an AI fact checker listening in on political debates.
Exactly. It's got a lot of potential. But like with any technology, there's downsides too.
Of course.
Got to be careful of bias in the algorithms themselves.
Right.
And then, of course, there's always the potential for misuse.
So it's a powerful tool,
Yes.
but we need to be careful.
For sure. And speaking of powerful tools,
Uh-oh.
there's actually research going on right now using fMRI to try to detect lies.
Wait, hold on. So they can see lies happening in the brain.
It's crazy.
That's straight out of science fiction.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. So fMRI basically lets researchers see what parts of your brain are active when you're doing different stuff.
Okay.
And we talked earlier about how lying uses certain brain regions, like the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
And there was that case in India a few years back where they actually used fMRI evidence in a murder trial.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
And it sparked this huge debate about whether brain scans should really be used that way.
Right, like to say whether somebody's guilty or not.
Exactly. It's really tricky.
I bet.
fMRI is super expensive. It's not really available everywhere.
Right.
And the results, well, they're open to interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, can we really boil something as complex as truthfulness down to a brain scan?
It's a big question. And it gets into some serious ethical territory.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it mean for our privacy if our thoughts and intentions can just be scanned and analyzed?
It's pretty mind-blowing to think about.
It is. It is.
So we've talked about a lot today. The science of lying, different technologies that are being used to detect lies. What do you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is that lying, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's not just about saying something false.
Right.
It's a whole process, like a symphony of activity in the brain.
Right. We've got the prefrontal cortex calling the shots, the limbic system sounding the alarm, and it's all this mental juggling behind the scenes.
Exactly. And because it takes so much effort, it can kind of leak out in those little ways we've been talking about.
Right, like through our body language, our tone of voice, even those micro expressions.
Exactly.
So even though we can't read minds, we can start to pick up on those inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Those moments when something just feels a little off.
It's all about kind of honing your observation skills, learning to to read between the lines, pay attention to how people are acting, listen for inconsistencies in their stories.
Right.
But remember, context is key.
Right.
You can't jump to conclusions just because you see one or two little signs.
Right. Somebody could just be having a bad day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They could be nervous, tired, who knows? Doesn't necessarily mean they're lying.
Right. Okay, so when it comes to those fancy lie detecting technologies, the polygraphs, the AI algorithms,
Yeah.
what's the bottom line there?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that they're not perfect.
Right. There's no such thing as a foolproof lie detector.
Yep.
And we have to be careful about relying too much on technology to tell us what's true and what's not true.
Especially when it comes to something as complex as human behavior.
Absolutely.
You know, and it makes you wonder, even if we could perfectly detect every lie,
Yeah.
would we want to?
That's a good question.
What kind of world would that be? Where every word is scrutinized and judged?
Yeah. Is that really the kind of world we want to live in?
Makes you think.
It does make you think. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for today. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this deep dive into the world of lying and deception.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I always love talking about the brain.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious.